So this recording will be sent out afterwards, probably sometime tomorrow for your reference. So just a little bit about 3C Ren, the organization that is putting on this event today. Tri-County Regional Energy Network is a partnership between San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura County, and we receive ratepayer funding to deliver energy efficiency programming for building professionals and households in the region. Next slide. 3C Ren has 3 programs. The program that is administering this course today is Energy Code Connect, which serves all building professionals through our training and support, as well as our live Energy Code coach. If you need any support in the field, you can get in contact with a live specialist, and our regional forums. We're having a regional forum on permitting on August 9th, and I will include the information and registration to that in the comments after this introduction. Our other 2 programs are Building Performance Training, which serves current and prospective building professionals and provides instruction in technical and soft skills. And then our Home Energy Savings Program is centered around rebates and incentives for multifamily and single-family properties. Next slide, please. I will be your 3C Ren staff online today, so if you have any questions, feel free to message me directly. And otherwise, I'm happy to turn it over to InBalance to get us started on our course for the day.
Thanks, Gray. Hi, I'm Jennifer Rennick, and I am gonna kind of lead the march here for Grant and myself. And Grant, I think Gray said that Grant is going to monitor the chat. Also, if you have a question that's pertinent to the slides, Grant can stop me and we can both address your question if it's not something that he can easily answer, like in the chat, separately. Today we're on the June 28th. So it is the 4th in our series on ICC 2022 Energy Code update. So we're going to address ADUs and a few other alterations that might come up on your project specific to ADUs. So learning objectives are here for you all in case you are doing this to get learning units. And Gray, I think learning units are available for this course, both for the ICC and AIA. Today, we're going to hit on a little bit of the code reorganization, some key terms before we dive into the ADUs portion of it. And then the bulk of all this is really going to be about the energy code updates specific for ADUs. And then if we have a little bit more time at the end, we'll stick around for questions and answers. Okay, to give everyone up to speed on the new 2022 Energy Code, there were some real big goals that the California Energy Commission had, and it was namely to encourage heat pump technology for space and water heating, to establish solar ready requirements, so electric ready requirements for single family and multifamily projects, but also that solar ready, battery ready for the non-res standards as well, and to strengthen ventilation standards in general. So the 2022 Energy Code really does make all electric construction easier, especially for our ADUs. So a lot of this is being done because heat pumps for domestic hot water is allowable in all the climate zones. And there is a new on-demand electric point of use distribution credit for ADUs and additions less than 500 square feet. So that's kind of new. That's the first time in the code we've had it be okay to use an on-demand electric water heater. So we're going to talk a bit more about that. And then in general, there's been some change in the indoor air quality ventilation requirements, where specifically for like induction and electric cooktops, you can use a smaller vent hood as compared to a gas cooktop. And part of the reason that the California Energy Commission is looking at all electric and especially making these kind of changes specific to ADUs is because the all electric is showing to be a lot more cost effective way to build, especially when you don't have to include the costs of the gas infrastructure. And an all electric home now in California has a smaller carbon footprint as compared to a 2019, code compliant home with the mixed fuel. So it's part of California's big picture goals to reduce our carbon footprint. Okay, so with that said, the other big change for the 2022 code is that the code itself has been reorganized. So under the 2019 code, energy code, I'm talking about part 6, there was basically 3 big categories. There was a section that included all buildings. Then there was a section specifically for high-rise residential, non-residential, and hotel motel. And then the low-rise residential. But now under the 2022 code, we still have a big section for all buildings. Now we've got non-res hotel motel. The high-rise residential portion has been pulled out of the section, and we've got a single family residential section. So the multifamily portion of the low-rise has been pulled out of that section. And now we've got a new category specifically addressing multifamily buildings. And if you're kind of a visual a visual learner, a visual person, this is what the old building tree and the 2019 code looked like, where we basically had 3 chapters for low-rise residential and then everything else that was not low-rise residential. And now under the new code, we've got the section for single family residents, multifamily residents, and then everything that's not residential. And today, with ADUs, they do apply to multifamily residential occupancy types, but most of the examples and everything we're going to talk about is specific to single family residents. That's the most common. But a lot of these same requirements track almost word for word in the multifamily residential sections. Couple of terms to be aware of I'm going to use. We're going to talk about mandatory requirements, and it's measures that are applicable to all projects. And I've color coded the slides, typically that orange color at the top, just as kind of a visual reminder. There's prescriptive component package, and those are requirements that you have to follow like a recipe card or a checklist. In order to comply prescriptively, you need to follow all the requirements under that section. And those topics are highlighted blue. And that prescriptive component package becomes the baseline to create a performance method or a computer modeling approach. And there are a few things I'm going to point out about that computer modeling approach, and I've highlighted those in gray for you up at the top. So under that performance method, new to the 2022 code is something called an EDR1 or Energy Design Rating 1 metric, and that is also known as source energy, and it's basically a proxy for carbon emissions. And then you might know from the prior code cycle and looking at CF1Rs and the new multifamily low-rise components, still going to have an EDR2 efficiency score and an EDR2 total score. So that doesn't change. And then additions and alterations to existing buildings. This is going to come up a lot because a lot of the ADUs are additions to existing buildings. And here we only have to worry about an EDR2 that's just the one metric and not the source energy. And for the single family, new Title 24, it basically looks like this when you see if the project's passed or not. This is an excerpt from one of the CF1Rs. And if source energy complies, EDR1, efficiency, EDR2 complies, and total, EDR2 is, you've got a compliance margin. The whole thing shows as a pass. Okay, so that looks pretty normal to a lot of folks who are used to looking at these reports. But now on our CF1R for additions and alterations, and you're going to be seeing this also with the ADU, is that you don't have that same kind of a chart. You'll see this, and you'll be looking to see that the compliance margin EDR2 shows a passing compliance margin. And the EDR1 score for the source, that proxy for carbon, it's just 0. Those columns have nothing in them. And it's basically saying that that particular score is not going to be applicable to additions and alterations, even though you're creating, in some cases, essentially a new dwelling unit. Still considered addition, which we're going to go over in the next slides. And that seems to be one of the bigger questions we have that comes up so far, is like, how do you categorize the ADUs? And part of that has a lot to do with something being an ADU in terms of planning and planning departments, land use, and what the state wants to do to encourage affordable housing. And so there are a lot of benefits to building accessory dwelling units. That's why we plan to see a lot more in our community and why we're offering the class. They do add affordability to housing, and it often gives people a lot of flexible living arrangements. This resource here is very, very good one. They've updated it. So last year in July, this accessory dwelling handbook has a whole new question, facts and answers section that I found really helpful. And they also have a contact the ADU team, they call it, for questions that have a lot more to do with the planning side of things. Now, when it comes to some of these definitions, you're going to hear us talk about an ADU and sometimes a junior ADU. And an ADU is defined as being a complete independent living facility for one or more persons with permanent provisions for the living, sleeping, eating, cooking, and sanitation. And they can have a full kitchen or they can have an efficiency kitchen. And if you want a little bit more information on the kitchens, go to 3C Ren's website. They do have some of the kind of requirements specific to efficiency kitchens, which also has come up a lot on questions for our organization. They has to have an independent bathroom facility, and they need to have their own heating and cooling system and their own thermostat. Or at least, they're not going to share the air with another dwelling unit. So it's an independent dwelling unit. It could be an addition to a house, or it could be standalone, but it's independent dwelling unit. And then a junior ADU is a conversion, typically, a conversion of existing space that's not more than 500 square feet. And that conversion is contained entirely within the existing single family residence. So it could be unconditioned space that gets converted, or it could be just a portion of the existing house that was conditioned that gets converted to a junior ADU. And there's some new language that clarifies that it has to have at least one exterior door, and it may have an interior access door to the rest of the house, but not necessarily. And it will have an efficiency kitchen, and it may share the sanitation facilities, and it may share the existing HVAC system. So the junior ADUs are a little bit different that way, and under the energy code are categorized slightly differently. Okay, so now we're going to dive into the energy code for ADUs. And ADUs, junior ADUs, they come in many forms, and a lot of times we'll see on plan sets that the architect, the homeowners, or the planning department, everyone agrees, yeah, this is an ADU, but it's not always consistent with what you're going to see on your Title 24 energy report. And that's because the energy code has categorize the ADUs where it fits within the energy code, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the word ADU is going to show up on the energy report. And so detached, brand new construction, standalone, you're going to get a Title 24 that looks like just brand new construction, single family residence. So there's going to be no ADU designation on that report. It's just going to be what I call just a regular Title 24 single family home report. And then for additions and alterations, so in other words, that ADU could be like an attic that was converted, a basement that was converted, a bonus room that was converted, an existing accessory, a structure like a garage or a shop that was converted. Or it can be just added on to the house like a regular addition. But in those instances, the energy code is going to call those types of ADUs additions, or it'll be part of the additions and alterations plus existing designation. And it's within those reports that you'll see that ADU might actually be called out and noted on the Title 24 report. So when you have your junior ADU or your ADU, and we're looking at this and getting your Title 24 documents and looking at, okay, is this complying and what does this really say? You're going to have certain sections of the code that are very specific to new construction. And that's going to be for your new standalone detached ADU, or it could be a brand new house that actually was designed with a junior ADU within it in the first place. And in that case, you're not going to see the ADU designation, but those projects will have to comply with all of section 150.1, and it's going to include electric ready, battery storage ready, and PV systems, along with the other rest of the code section. Now, if you have an addition, which can be a conversion, either attached or detached, or it could be a junior ADU that's attached, but it's converted from unconditioned to conditioned space, all those are considered additions under the energy code. And we're going to go through what implications there are for the envelope, ventilation, mechanical heating, cooling, and domestic hot water. And then there's situations where you might also have alterations in addition to all that. And if you have a junior ADU that's within that conditioned space and it's not more than 500 square feet, and it's at that point, planning department, the owners, everyone else may call this thing a junior ADU, but the energy code, it's an alteration. And again, there are going to be a few things we're going to talk about that are unique to the alterations under the 2022 code, which has to do with some air sealing and attic insulation requirements. Okay, so the new construction side of it, pretty straightforward. You build a new ADU on the property. Nothing was there before, and it's a brand new house. And as such, you're going to have to comply with all of that section of the code. There's a couple of exceptions or things you can do if the ADU is small enough, and we'll hit on that. It has to comply with the mandatory measures. So new to the 2022 code is kind of improved language on indoor air quality. And ASHRAE 22.2 continues to be the basis for the quantity of outside air and allowable methods for meeting the outside air requirement. And we still have field verification of the outside air system. So that all that will be the same for your ADU. And then new to the 2022 code is some updated language and requirements on kitchen and bathroom exhaust, and prescriptive ventilation duct sizing is now possible, and balanced ventilation with heat recovery. Okay, so what may show up on the ADUs that was applicable to those changes is your kitchen range hood and other exhaust fans. Specifically for the kitchen range hood, new to the 2022 code is allowing range hoods to be slightly smaller sized compared that are electric or induction as compared to gas range hoods. So now those two categories have been split out and they're slightly different requirements for each of them. If you have a if you have a hood that has been tested to show a capture efficiency, you can use that value in this chart. Otherwise, you would just choose the hood by the amount of CFM that is exhausted. So if you wanted to put in a hood of 110 CFM, for example, that would only work for dwelling units larger than 1,000 square feet. But if you were building a small ADU, say 500 square feet, and you put in an electric stove, an electric range, you would have to have a hood of the minimum of 160 CFM. And the local mechanical exhaust for kitchen and baths, this is part of the CF2Rs. And I included these in here just for your reference, and it just clarifies that whether the kitchen's enclosed or not, and floor area volume is part of prescriptive calculations. And it also includes some summary for some of the mandatory kitchen requirements and other duct sizing. So these are a good resource, and this is what your HERS person will have.
Hey, Jennifer, we got
Yeah.
two questions about the ADUs and JADUs.
Yeah.
First one's from Jimmy, asking if a JADU doesn't have an interior door to the main house, does it need its own heating and cooling, sharing HVAC ducts? So my understanding is to be considered a JADU, it would need that interior door to the main house. And even then, when considered a JADU, you're still not, you can't share the HVAC to the ADU. It needs to have a standalone system. It can't return air.
Okay, so just everything is true for what you said for ADUs, but they clarified in that new handbook that junior ADUs may or may not have an interior door to the rest of the house. But I think what gets tricky and isn't really clear is if there is not an interior door, how will you deal with that person living there being able to adjust their own thermostat? So I think that's where it gets a little kind of a little tricky in that sense, because the energy code doesn't explicitly say that you cannot share the mechanical heating with your junior ADU, but it does explicitly say in the mechanical code that you cannot share it with an ADU.
But the handbook has come through and overwrote that you can't have that you need to have an interior door.
The new handbook says that the interior door for a junior ADU is not mandatory.
Interesting.
Yeah, I know,
The
right?
second question, and please,
But
Jimmy,
you do have to have an exterior door.
right.
They clarified that too.
Jimmy, if that doesn't totally answer your question, just ping me and we can keep going or take it offline. The second question, Jennifer, from Mark was, for new detached ADUs, can the solar be installed on the existing single-family residence? Yes.
Yes, it can be. But if your single family residence already had its solar system and it was already sized for that, you can't double count it to count for your ADU. But if you wanted to just put it on the house because that makes sense and you got good access and the infrastructure's there, you can do that.
Which is great because you answered his second question, is that if it has an existing PV, can that count towards the required PV for the ADU? So no. Now there might be a weird world of if that PV was installed without being required. I think that's a weird world to enter. And in 99% of cases, it's just no. You would need to add additional solar for the ADU.
And we're going to hit on a slide that for some ADUs now, the change in the code, they may not be large enough or have enough loads to actually require PVs anymore.
Yep. Okay, continue. Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, yeah, and so here we go, electric ready. So same requirement for everything. If you install a gas or propane domestic hot water system, it's allowed. You can do it, but if you do it, you have to follow through with setting up a future 240 volt in your meter and have the outlet ready and have space ready. Basically, it's electric ready for a heat pump water heater. That is true for even the ADUs. Okay, but I mean, true for all the ADUs. Now, this section, this electric ready, this is specific to just the new construction detached ADUs, which is that you would now have electric ready for converting a furnace to a heat pump or cooktop to induction or electric, or a gas dryer to an electric dryer. And this section here tracks with the dryer portion of it tracks exactly with the multifamily, only it includes now, centrally shared dryers. But this, if you do that standalone ADU question we had, yeah, electric ready on all these things is required, but when it's an addition, this section doesn't apply. And standalone new construction, so meaning it's detached, you do need to comply with the requirements for battery ready. And what battery ready basically means is that you're going to set up the infrastructure with a sub panel and some dedicated circuits. And there's requirements that those dedicated circuits need to feed at least one to your refrigerator, one to a light near primary exit, and at least one to a sleeping room receptacle, and then another one. There's a requirement too that your bus bar rating of the panels is going to be 225 amps minimum now. So we've had that come up too on the ADUs. Do we have to have the new panel for the small house, or can we move it someplace else? I think we would have to dig in and get clarification on those questions. Grant may have to chime in what we found out last time, but we've had some builders want to push back on that. But the energy code says a 225 amp panel minimum is now required for the standalone new construction single family house. Also, the PV panels. So PV panels required. However, there is a new exemption, which is that PV system is not required when the kilowatt PV rating of that system is less than 1.8 kilowatts. So, for example, I said, okay, let's say you've got an 1,000 square foot ADU in climate zone 6 you want to build. And I used the formula, prescriptive formula, to see where we would be with that requirement. And it came out that the system would be sized to 1.82 kilowatts. So yes, it would be required. But let's say you were just building a small ADU, 500 square feet in climate zone 6. You would be well under the 1.8 kilowatt requirement. And so in that case, you wouldn't have to put the PVs in at all. And then you wouldn't have to worry about whether you fit the new PVs on your old house or not, to come back to that question, or the existing house. And just to kind of give it kind of a sense, if you assumed it was a 300-watt panel for that 1,000 square foot example, that would be just 6 panels that you're making room for. And each panel is approximately 40 inches by 67 inches for that, you know, not a super high output residential panel. Anything you want to add on that, Grant?
Nope, you're good.
Okay. I do mention whole house fan ventilation because it is this requirement is a prescriptive requirement. In other words, if you're going to comply prescriptively, you follow all the parts of the checklist. And this is just one part of the checklist that's applicable to climate zones 8 through 14. So we do have those climate zones down in the Ventura area, and this may come up. However, this whole house fan for ventilation cooling is not required for dwelling units with a conditioned floor area of 500 square feet or less. So again, they're saying, well, if you've got a really small ADU, 500 square feet or less, you don't have to do this, but otherwise you would for your new construction. Okay, when it comes to the additions, now this is where you're going to see, this is where you'll actually see ADU designated on your Title 24 report. And the code, energy code, considers all of these situations additions. So your new construction, you're attaching it onto the existing residence, that's an addition. You take a garage and you convert it from unconditioned to conditioned ADU, that's an addition. You take a detached, garage or shop that previously exists, you now condition it, convert it to an ADU. That's also an addition, even though it's not connected. The energy code calls all those things additions. On the junior ADU realm, you could also have a situation where you have an existing garage that is connected to the house. So, and that handbook clarified this, and that is all within the existing walls. They call it in the handbook. We'd call it an envelope, but it's within that existing footprint. And if you convert that to a junior ADU, it would also be considered an addition. And then for these additions, there's some envelope requirements. It's pretty much the same from prior code cycles, but it's worth repeating because you'll see this often taken as a wall exemption credit on the Title 24. And we've sometimes see this credit being used liberally. And it's supposed to be used for very specific situations, and it's not always that straightforward. So I'm going to go over a few of those. And then we will hit on a few of the topics dealing with the ventilation, indoor air quality, mechanical heating, cooling, and the domestic hot water. Okay, so under the additions section of the code, there is a wall extension exemption. And basically that wall that's in alignment, let's say you're building a new attached construction, a new attached addition, the wall that's in alignment can continue to be a thin framed wall. If you had 2x4 on the existing house, you can have 2x4 on this house, and you just have to fill it with a cavity insulation. The other walls are considered new, and now you would have to comply with the prescriptive components of that. If that is problematic, that's when we see a lot of folks go to performance modeling. So you have trade-offs. And then what that looks like is that if the walls are completely in a line with each other, you get that wall extension exemption. But if there's any bit of a bump or break in those walls, the extension exemption no longer applies. And where I've seen this happen naturally is just, let's say you've got an existing structure that's also non-conforming in that it's too close to the property line, and now you're doing your ADU addition. That ADU has to be stepped back from the property line to be in compliant with that part of planning regulations. And once you have to step it back, the walls no longer align up. So now all those walls are considered new walls. And you may have to do the continuous insulation requirement if you're doing it prescriptively. And under the new code, when you take a look at these tables, everything's listed as U factors as opposed to how much insulation you need in the wall. So just for your reference, I included this table that basically is from the joint appendices. And just to give you an idea of how much insulation is required for the wall thickness based on the climate zone. So a lot of cases, this is where we see folks moving to performance method modeling to trade off that continuous exterior insulation, especially if they only have a few walls that need it. When it comes to conversions, they're still considered additions, and some of these existing walls may qualify for an exemption also. And it's not a wall extension exemption, but it is an exemption nonetheless from having to have the continuous exterior insulation. And the real caveat here is that you're not removing the siding, and you're leaving all of the exterior siding on place on these existing structures. And if that's the case, you could just, when you do the interior remodel, you can fill those 2x4 or 2x6 walls with cavity insulation. For the indoor air quality ventilation, there has been some new language included in the code, and they are specifically saying that new dwelling units, i.e. ADUs, that are additions, which is kind of what we've been talking about, to an existing building shall have mechanical ventilation, airflow, et cetera, et cetera. And translation is, it's got to follow ASHRAE 62.2 for fresh outside air. And for the single family ADU, you can use a supply only, exhaust only, or balanced ventilation. And here's some examples of that. You can have balanced ventilation with heat recovery as part of that situation. With the multifamily, this tracks exactly with the language only. You're going to have to use balanced ventilation or comply with the dwelling unit air pressure boundary sealing and acceptance testing. But otherwise, these are acceptable ways to meet that requirement. They also updated the language to make a note specifically concerning junior accessory dwelling units that are additions to an existing building, and that they're not required to comply with the whole unit ventilation. So that's kind of interesting. It comes, I think they did some cost-effective studies, and they decided that the junior ADUs don't need that. When it comes to your additions for your local mechanical exhaust, means bathrooms and kitchens, they still have to have local exhaust. So we used to see for a while that small apartments, ADUs, folks would not put in an exhaust fan for their kitchen or a vent fan over the hood either. And that's just flat out not allowed. You have to have some kind of exhaust that takes that the cooking effluent, you could call it, and get it outdoors for improved indoor air quality. And then you could come back and take a look at those requirements for what size hood you would need depending on the size of your dwelling unit and what fuel you're being used. And to have a microwave recirculation hood above the cooktop doesn't count as meeting this requirement. You could do it, but you would have to install a fan in that kitchen that basically then took that recirc air from your microwave recirc and grab that air and take it outdoors. Additions for both the juniors and attached ADUs, there also is an exemption for your space heating system type. So new or replacement space heating system serving that addition. It can be a heat pump or it can be a gas heating system. So there's some flexibility there, but we're finding that the one-to-one heat pumps with its own programmable thermostat has been like the go-to choice for just about every project we've seen so far. There's some additional requirements for the roofs and the ceilings. Basically, certain climate zones got an upgrade to an R38 roof. So this could come into play for additions that are 700 square feet or less in this case. So we're kind of full circle, kind of that reminder on the heating and cooling systems. Part of the reason these mini splits with the one-to-one indoor unit and outdoor unit and its own thermostat are so handy is because the ADUs may not share the return air with the primary dwelling through the heating and cooling system. So it is actually theoretically possible you could have one outdoor unit and you could have multiple indoor units. And I did have a project that did that. They were able to size the house. They had one outdoor unit and it went to two like pancake units, you could call them, but they're concealed ductless units. And I'll show that right. So like the picture on the left. And so they had two of those. And so each of those sort of pancake units has its own return and its own supply. And so each of the main dwelling and then the one that was called the ADU dwelling, they could each have their own thermostat and they did not share the return air. So the air wasn't mixed up. Or you could do it like the image on the right and use wall-mounted ductless systems and just introduce your fresh air the way we talked about with the balanced air supply or exhaust air systems. For the heat pumps, water heating, that is, you can use a heat pump. It can be a split system or an integrated system, or you can do a gas on demand. That's still allowable. But what is new now is for dwelling units with up to one bedroom, they could use 120 volt heat pump water heater. And those 120 volts units plug in to the wall. So the idea is to try and make it a heck of a lot easier for folks to build ADUs. You can also use a point of use electric water heater for those ADUs or additions that are 500 square feet or less. And there's some special requirements for what it means to have a point of use distribution, which is part of the requirement for being able to use an electric on demand. And so you'll want to reference appendices RA 4.4, 4.5. And there's it's the plumbing lines that run from that unit to each of the fixtures that come into play to be considered a point of view. So you're limited on your run length. And so what usually happens is you're going to have 3/4 inch lines coming out of that hot water heater. And then you're going to want to manifold that down very quickly and then switch to like your 3/8 inch to get it to your sink faucet and a 1/2 inch like diameter to get it to your shower. And there's uh, also a good resource in the CF2R that's available for informational. It's not valid until it's registered, but informationally, it kind of explains and gives you examples of how you can combine some of these lengths of piping to be considered for point of use. Interestingly enough, the point of use will show up as a required special feature on the CF1R. It doesn't trigger HERS rating directly, but it does show up as a special required feature. And also in the water heating section itself, it'll show up as having a distribution type of point of use. And I was playing around with the software this week and noticed that if the user of the software did not take that point of use credit, it was very hard to have the building comply. So most likely you're going to see that point of use on there, which is a requirement for using that system.
And Jennifer, that's
Yeah.
something that we anticipate popping up now and then as a something to verify that there actually is point of use within the design, right? Because it's pretty easy
Right.
just to hit that button and then assume no one will see that you're not actually within the lengths.
Right, that's right. So part of the reason I created this little graphic on the left is just to kind of give you all a visual of how close that needs to be. Like you can't see it further away than that because you probably can't do the plumbing runs you need and make it work. So it's
And it's supposed to be for 500 square feet and less, so it really is a specific size and proximity.
yes, yes,
Great, thanks.
yes, exactly. And then on the alterations, again, for the junior ADUs, you're going to see the junior ADU being within that envelope or the walls of the existing structure and in that case, it's like a remodel, it's an alteration. And you will have some exceptions to existing walls potentially, depending on what you're doing with it. In this case, it's like you could imagine maybe there was a bonus room less than 500 square feet, and they can added a small efficiency kitchen and let that person have the downstairs bathroom or whatnot and make it its own apartment, but it still shares the same ventilation, heating, cooling, hot water system with the rest of the house. That's okay. But the kitchen's going to trigger some of those other requirements for the indoor air quality for sure. And just part of the alteration, you might have a situation with how you rearrange stuff that you might have a duct system that needs an extension. So if that's true and you do start dealing with your ducts, there's some new requirements specifically for alterations that trigger duct leakage testing sooner than it would have under the prior code. You might get into a situation where you're also altering the ceilings. And if that ceiling is of a vented attic, there's a new section in the alterations portion of the code that deals specifically with requiring you replace that insulation with R49, for example, not even R30 or R38, but R49, dependent on the climate zone, and also dependent on how old the house is and if there's asbestos or not. And then the recessed lighting fixtures could remain, but you have to make sure that you've got a cover and fireproof and air sealed, or replace the light fixtures. And there's also a new section specifically dealing with air sealing on when you're doing an alteration, and if the part of that attic gets disturbed as part of your project. Some of these new requirements could come into play. And basically, what was shown is that even for the alterations, better air sealing and higher insulation levels in the attics was a very cost-effective way to save energy and reduce California's households' impact on our energy grid. And the alterations, like I mentioned, could also trigger some of the ventilation IAQ systems. And specifically, you'll probably see that for the kitchen exhaust, potentially the bathroom exhaust, but that's going to come more into play if you are replacing the equipment and replacing the fans, and how extensively that alteration and remodel is for setting up a new efficiency kitchen and or a new bathroom for the junior ADU. Okay, and then with that said, if you have questions, and whether or not you are a builder or an architect or a plans examiner or do field inspection, open to all. We have our code coach service through Energy Code, 3cren.org, the Energy Code Coach. Grant's one of the coaches. And with that, we can take questions, and I'm going to let Gray give you a little preview of the upcoming presentations, and then we'll stay on the line for as long as folks want to ask questions. So feel free to unmute yourself and ask, or put something in the chat. It's all good.
Great. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Before we get into any questions, I'm just going to briefly give you all an overview of what you can expect next from 3C Ren. I already included a link to our registration for our summer forum on energy-friendly permitting. If you're involved in the permitting process at any step, we really encourage you to come learn more about some best practices and some common concerns for electrification permits. And we'll have a great panel that we'll be announcing next week. There's also 2 more courses left in our ICC series, non-res and CalGreen. So be sure to register for those if you haven't already. And then some other upcoming courses we have are on recovery ventilators on July 11th or July 12th, looking at energy savings and compliance credits. On July 14th, we have a case for practical home performance electrification. And on July 18th, we have a zero net carbon design series focused on the energy water nexus. You can check out all of our events at 3crn.org/events. And then I will be sending all of the slides from today, as well as a recording, to you all tomorrow.
Grant, do we have anything in the chat?
As I shook my head, one came in.
Good.
Neil shot us one. What are the insulation requirements for wall insulation for a garage conversion between the JADU and the residence, and the JADU and the exterior? So the insulation requirements for the interior wall, and then also the exterior walls for a JADU.
Okay, so are you gonna answer that one? Just answer it?
I was gonna hop back. Maybe you could hop back to the slide that had the table
Yeah.
outlining each of them.
Right. Okay, I don't know a fast way to go to the slide right now, so you're gonna see like the whole thing. Basically, the wall that's shared is now an interior wall. And the, this isn't, and the wall that, so like the 3 exterior walls, so it might be like the example on the left, those 3 exterior walls, if you're not taking the siding off and you're keeping all that in place, then if you have a 2x4 framed wall, you would fill it with R15 insulation. And if you have a 2x6 existing framed wall, you would fill it with R21 insulation. And so the kind of the cost effectiveness part of it is that they're not requiring you to pull off your siding and add continuous insulation.
Worth noting that if you do pull off your siding though, then you need to.
Right. So if you do pull off the siding and you are redoing the walls, then yes, and you're taking it down to the studs, which we do have, you know, some folks do that, then yes, now the other requirements are triggered. The prescriptive requirements are triggered, which is,
I like to think of it as like an alteration versus the exception is like a repair, you know? Hey, we're demoing the interior and repairing everything, converting it. We're repairing by just putting insulation in those walls like we're supposed to do when we have open cavities.
right.
But as soon as you tear open those walls from the exterior, now we're under a full alteration project and you're going to be held to prescriptive code.
Yes. And then the only other way to mitigate for that is to do it performance.
Yep,
And then
always
you'll
do.
have to do, I've had that be the case where the clients opted for replacing their water heating system with something more energy efficient than dealing with the walls.
Yep, common, yep.
Yeah. So that's the thing. You can see all kind of combination of that. Now, oh yeah, go ahead.
That was it. Hoping for another question.
And folks, you can, yeah, if any, do you want me to, I can keep the slideshow up or I can turn it off, and I don't know if folks have their, want to do unmute and just talk, that's fine too.
Noise requirement for garage conversion. By energy code, I'd say no.
Yeah, not by energy code.
Nothing
The
associated
only
with
thing in
energy code.
energy code that deals with noise would be your exhaust fans still have to be within a certain zone limit, depending on how much CFM they're pulling. So they have to be rated for that. But most of the noise requirements are planning department issues. And I honestly don't know how the planning department, typically with additions, you're not dealing with
Yeah.
those noise mitigations. New construction, you are for sure.
Yeah, Mark chimed in saying the code requires 50 SDC between dwelling units. So that would be the code that on that interior wall for a garage conversion for residential. That makes sense.
Got you, right? I was thinking actually exterior noise. I was thinking outside noise transmission.
Oh, maybe I'm wrong. Thanks, Mark, though.
No. I mean, I think they can both. I mean, no, that's perfect. Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of our multifamily projects, you know, where it is a big deal that they have to have the outside noise transmission mitigation. Yeah.
Yeah, depending. We got another question through. New ADU over an existing one-story garage with 2x4s and no insulation. So we're adding a new structure on top of an existing garage. Do it.
Okay. So if the dwelling unit is new, in the sense that you're converting something that was above the garage, those existing walls, it's still the siding question, and you can take that wall extension exemption in the vertical plane.
Robert, is this a new build on top of the garage, or is this a two-story garage and you're only converting the upstairs?
It's a new build over an existing uninsulated garage.
Yeah, the California Energy Commission in their blueprint publication had a clarification that wall extension exemption could be applicable in the vertical direction as well. So if you have some walls that are completely aligned with that garage wall as you go up, you could take an exception to the continuous insulation on that. But if you're
But-
stepping it back or tearing everything down to reinforce the structure, it probably is more of a structural engineering question of how you'll end up with your final situation. And then the energy code will encourage you to use walls that have continuous exterior insulation on it where possible, you know.
Mhm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we are at time, so I'm going to stop our recording, and I have to go to a meeting. But Jennifer and Grant, if you want to stay on and answer more questions, you're welcome to. Otherwise, thank you all so much for joining, and we hope to see you at our next ICC event.
Okay, if anyone pops up a question in the last second, we'll answer.